See everybody tonight. I do want to remind those of you who are live and watching on our Facebook stream, if you have a question, you want to ask a question, just put it in the comment section on the Facebook stream, and the guys in the back will let us know. We are on lesson number 16. If you need a copy of that, let me know. Good job. Everybody got them back. Awesome. Well, if you got your Bibles, we're in Revelation 13, so go ahead and be turning over there. I'm hoping to get through 13 tonight. If you remember, last week we picked up after the battle between the dragon and the woman flees, and then the battle in heaven takes place, and then the woman flees to the desert, and then as a result, let's get there. We saw two beasts, or actually we just started talking about this first beast that John sees comes out of the sea. Call it the sea beast, if you will. If you remember last week, one of the things that kind of where we left off, we were talking about the power or the authority that this beast had, and it came directly from who? It came from God, but the sea beast got his authority given to him directly from the dragon. If you remember, the dragon's the one who gave him the authority to do what he wanted. Now, ultimately, the dragon, Satan, whatever, got his authority, got his power from God because he has nothing of his own. Okay, all authority emanates from the throne of God. We get that. Okay, so but don't forget that power had to be given. It wasn't earned. It wasn't conquered. It wasn't grabbed by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, in verse 2 of 13, the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. So we understand that the authority for this beast to do what he's doing is coming from Satan himself. Okay, and we talked last week how this beast, and remember, we're talking imagery here, we're talking symbolism. This beast symbolizes, you remember what it was? What's that? Roman government. This is the civil authority. This is the empire, if you will. This is Rome as a governmental entity. This is Caesar. This is the powers that be at the time. Okay? It kind of shows us the total power of the dragon is going to be invested into this beast. Okay? Because he wants to accomplish something through it. It's an important point because as a result, this beast is going to be hard to destroy. If you look at verse 3, it says one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Okay, you can't really see it on the painting there, but we talked a little bit about this last week. Historically, if you look at what's going on during this time frame, okay, some commentators speculate that the mortal wound that is talked about here would be the death of Nero. Nero was one that was persecuting the church heavily. We have all heard stories of Nero and his, lighting Christians in the gardens and all of that kind of stuff. So Nero's persecution was well known, and then Nero died. And some believe that's the mortal wound that's described here. And there would have been a time of ease within the persecution, but then Domitian comes along, and Domitian ends up being even worse in his persecution than Nero ever thought about being. So it's continuous as it moves on. Okay, but understand, as big and bad as the picture is of this beast with its heads and its crowns, and I mean, it looks like a leopard. It's got feet like a bear. A mouth like a lion. All of the imagery points to a very daunting, very powerful, very ferocious figure. But that's just how it appears. Okay? That's just how it appears. It appears to be strong. But remember, the power that he had was given to him. He didn't take it, he didn't earn it, he didn't conquer it. Okay? Important thing to remember. Verse 5 says, the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise for 42 months. Okay, again, 42 months is how many, what is that symbolic of? 3.5, right, 42 months, 3.5 years, 3.5 is half of 7, which just means a fixed period of time, all right? In other words, it wasn't going to last forever. Okay. But don't forget that God is the source of all power, even that of the beast. You hear all through this, God, or that he was allowed this, or he was given this. It wasn't something that he was born with or created with. Okay, matter of fact, we continue in verse 7. It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given to it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it, everyone whose name was not written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Okay, so who's actually worshiping this beast? Who does it say? Inhabitants of the earth. All of them? No. Who isn't? Those whose names have not been written in the book of life. Right. Okay, important thing to remember there. Is not all of humanity worshiping. Christians, those whose names are in the book, are not pictured here as worshiping the beast. And if you're not one who is worshiping the beast, guess what? You will be one who is attacked by the beast. Okay? It's either or in this situation. So what are they to do? If you're a Christian in this situation, you get this picture of this horrendous beast. What do you do? What do you do? How do you respond? How do you act? If you understand that this thing is representative of the government that you are under, that you are living in, how do you respond? Yeah, read the next verse. He who has an ear, let him hear. Sounds very ominous to the words of Jesus at the end of the Sermon on the Mount when he says, he who has an ear, let him hear. Okay? In other words, pay attention. But pay attention to who? Who's he telling these Christians to pay attention to? This monstrosity of a beast that's before them? Or who? God. Keep your eyes focused on God. Keep listening to the real authority. Keep listening to God. It's important to know the destiny of the beast, I think, out of the sea and what will happen to it. Remember, the dragon and the beast are kind of now one because the dragon has imparted all of his power into this beast. So we kind of need to know what happens to it. Well, it's kind of cool when you think about it. Look at verse 10. The very last thing he says after he tells them to, if you got an ear, listen, he says this: if anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. And if anyone is to be slain with the sword, must he be slain. Here's a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. What's he saying? What's that? Well, he said, if you use the sword, you're going to do what? Die by it. If you take people into captivity, guess what's going to happen to you? You're going to be taken captive, all right? I think it's prophetic about the end of Rome and this empire as to what's going to happen, okay? Again, the symbolism can't be missed. When Peter and the apostles are following Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the Jewish government at that point in time come after to arrest Jesus, what's Peter's first reaction? Grab a sword, start hacking. What does Jesus say? You remember? Matthew 26. Put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. I don't think it's any coincidence. It's almost word for word what's echoed here in Revelation when they're talking about what's going to happen to this beast. You bring the sword, guess what? You're going to get the sword. Okay? Now, this enemy, with its worldwide civil power and with intent to wipe out everyone with God's name on their foreheads and kill anyone who is following the Lamb, he's basically saying they're going to die as hard as they fight in captivity and by the sword. It's interesting, though, that Revelation 13, 1 through 10 is actually a parallel passage to Daniel chapter 7. Okay? In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel gets a prophecy of 4 world kingdoms that are going to come on the earth. Now, Daniel's told to seal up that prophecy because it's going to take place way in the future. But the description of these 4 kingdoms is important. And we could go through there and look at them. I'll just tell you what they are. The first, anybody know what the first one was? Starts with a B, ends with Babylon. Babylon. And then the next great empire was Medo-Persians. And then the third one, Greeks. And then the fourth one is, of course, Rome. Okay? They all pretty much, I know they didn't set out to do this, and if you probably went back and interviewed them today, if you could do that, and ask them, what's your purpose? They would say, world conquest, right? That's what they wanted. I know that's what Alexander wanted. The Babylonians, they just wanted to rule the world. I mean, not a big task. They just wanted the world. Same kind of thing. Greeks, same kind of deal. Okay? More's better, always. That's the thought. But yet, if you went back and asked them, was your purpose to destroy the people of God? Most of them would probably say, no. Who? Yeah, which God? They had so many gods, they didn't think about it. But now, in doing what they were doing, what was their ultimate result? They were destroying the people of God. What happens when you go up against the people of God? You go up against God. You going to win that fight? Never. Never. And that's the message, really, of Revelation. Okay? But what I want you to see here, Daniel chapter 7, verse 23 says this, thus he said, as for the fourth beast, Rome, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces. And if you look at geographically the effect that the Roman Empire had on the world at that time, compared to the Greeks, compared to the Medo-Persians, compared to even the Babylonians, their footprint was much larger than any of these first three kingdoms. So when he describes it as breaking it into pieces, it makes sense. It's allegorical, though, right? We see that. But what I also want you to see in Daniel chapter 7 is verse 26 and 27, because Daniel goes on to then prophesy about what's going to happen to this fourth beast, which we know is who? Rome. Same dragon we're talking about in Revelation 13 is the fourth beast in Daniel chapter 7. Okay? Now listen to what he says in 26 and 27. We've talked a little bit about this before. He says, but the court shall sit in judgment. Do you remember when we talked about this? Who was the court made up of? Do you remember? We talked about it a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the saints. Yeah, the court was made up of the saints in heaven, right? But listen to what he says. The court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away. Talking about the fourth beast. To be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. You see, these seven churches needed to understand. They needed to understand their future. They needed to understand the future of this beast. Now, understand, were these seven people in these seven churches, were they looking for a seven-headed, 10-horned dragon to come walking down the street? No, they weren't. They understood the symbolism, okay? They'd seen it their whole lives through the Old Testament. They understood this, as should we now, okay? But now John sees another beast. He sees another beast. He's seen this big, I'm going to call him red because he's painted red. Not red, the leopard one, right? He sees him, and now another beast comes up out of the earth. Listen to this, starting in verse 11. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceived those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Okay. I don't have to tell you how many times since Hollywood became Hollywood that this part of Revelation has been completely distorted. Okay? Right? Probably even before that. Right. But still, the mark of the beast, what is it? Everybody knows that. Everybody, ever since Gregory Peck made that first Damien movie, that little boy running around the second floor with his tricycle. Y'all remember? Y'all probably too young to remember that movie. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Right? The mark of the beast. But here's the funny thing. It's been so misinterpreted to be the mark of the beast. We assume the mark of the beast goes to Satan, and it's the mark of Satan, and it's the mark of the Antichrist, and all this stuff. But remember, the mark. Which beast are we talking about here? We talking about the dragon? Nope. We talking about the one that's come out of the sea? Nope. We're talking about the third one down the line. We're not even talking about Satan here. Okay? And if you just reading it, you understand that. Okay? But what does he say about it? The origin of the second beast, where does he come up out of? The earth. What is that symbolic of? What do you think? Hell? Okay, that's a good guess. Man, out of dust he came. Let me ask you this. Since he came up out of the earth, where do we know he did not come from? Heaven, which means he's not divine. He's not eternal. Okay? Now, understand this. We're talking about symbolism here. And we're talking about what this beast represents, because obviously there wasn't a beast that looked like that running around. Okay? The nature of this beast can be seen in the fact that he has the horns like a lamb. Okay? Which just simply means he probably had an innocent or even a religious look to it. Probably hypocritical, though. Okay? He claimed to be the religion of the gods. He talked religion, but his character did something completely opposite, because he was ready to devour those who refused to worship the image of the first beast. Most theologians refer to this beast as representative of the religion of Rome. Okay? And I don't mean the religion of Rome in that, they worship Zeus or Apollo or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. Some commentators call this a cult of emperor worship. There was within that time a very strong, politically allied priesthood, even within the Roman government, that required people of Rome to claim that Caesar was what? A god. Okay? Now, when you go back and you read some of the historians who track some of the Caesars, most of the Caesars were smart enough men to realize that they were not gods. Okay? There were a few who were really out there, who really did believe they were gods, and they really forced people to worship them. But what I want you to see is this is more about politics and loyalty than it is about the way we think of worship. Right? We come together to worship God. We want to give homage to God. We want to give praise to God. We want to give sacrifice. We want to lift God up. This is really not what this is talking about. This is more of an act of allegiance. But there was within the Roman society and within Roman government, these folks who had power, an awful lot of power. Matter of fact, we'll talk about it in a little bit, to make this stuff happen. Okay? Look at verse 14 and 15. He says, by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword. It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. So this group, they're holding up Rome, they're holding up Caesar, they're holding up the empire as something to be worshipped. And if you didn't worship it, pledge your allegiance to it, what does it say this beast had the power to do? Kill you. Now this is True stuff. Okay? Well, literally cancel culture. Yeah, literally, you don't do what we think you ought to do, you die. Okay? But understand, the function of this second beast was to make everyone on earth worship the first beast. Its purpose was to point everybody to the one with the horns, with the crowns. Okay? And they worked in concert together. Okay? I don't know even how to kind of relate this to today, other than probably a bad analogy here. Maybe a political action committee that is vying for one candidate. Okay? In other words, everything they do is to get their candidate elected or to get their candidate's attention. You know what I'm saying? That was their job. You have a thought?
I heard it talked about in the sense of they had many gods. So having many gods, essentially even the emperor was one of many gods. But for the Christians, there's only one God and all the rest of them are bad or not gods. And it's like, well, wait, that's really weird.
Yeah, that is true. They were very polytheistic, and you could have 100 different gods. But we'll get to the Christians' response in a minute. But this isn't about worshiping a god. This is about taking these citizens of Rome, citizens in the empire, and saying, okay, in order to do anything in the empire, you are going to have to claim allegiance to Caesar above all else. As a matter of fact, you can worship Apollo, you can worship Zeus, you can worship Orion, you can worship whoever you want, but you have to claim Caesar as your Lord. Okay? Now that doesn't mean you have to live your life. As Christians, we want to say, you know what? If you claim Jesus as Lord, you better back that up with how you live. Right? I mean, because just claiming Jesus as Lord and not living like he's Lord is pointless. Okay? Now, in this society, they're not out there monitoring how you live, right? If you claim, it's more like you're going down, you got to register. Maybe that's the best way to put it. You got to go down to the post office and register, and you got to register as Caesar. I'm a follower of Caesar. Caesar is Lord. And when you register, you get a stamp, okay? You either get a stamp on your forearm or you get a stamp on your forehead. Did you catch that in there? It's always, hidden, but it wasn't hidden here. Matter of fact, it had to be seen. In that culture, if you had the mark of Rome on your right hand, it means you were strong, you were powerful. You probably would get a job that required strength. If you had a mark on your forehead, that symbolized what? What do you think? Knowledge, intellect, right? So you may get a job doing something that required more thinking, okay? So it was a political and socioeconomical tool that Rome used to control its people. But the Christian has to go in there, and in order to receive that mark, in order to transact business, in order to buy things, in order to sell things, he had to go in, and before he could get his mark, what would he have to do? Claim Caesar as Lord. And no Christian would do that. Well, again, don't forget who this is written to. Back to the 7 churches. What was part of their problem? Some were playing both sides of the fence. Some were playing both sides of the fence. Some were saying, oh, you know what? It's not going to do me any harm to register as a Caesar lover because I don't really love him. But I know I can't buy anything. I know I can't sell anything. I know I can't get a job. Therefore, I can't give to the church, so it'll be okay. We ever rationalize that way? Yeah. Jesus says, no, you be faithful. And this is exactly why. Walter, do you have a... To the what? Oh. I didn't even know they were going to require passports with COVID stamps to travel. Wow. I don't know. But you see what's going on here, okay? And look at the powers. Look at verse 13 and 14. I know I'm kind of skipping around. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword. In other words, it's got the power to give orders. It's got the power to control people. Boyd. Uh-huh. Right? Correct. It was a law, though, that did what?
But did it stop them from worshiping God the way that we do today? Did it stop them from doing it?
Okay. What we know of the persecution that was going on, maybe not in the districts of these 7 churches specifically, but in Rome proper, okay? We know that most of their worship services were done in secret and in hiding, because if they were caught, they would be killed, okay? So even, and then here, you kind of see the domino effect that happens here. I go into register or do whatever to get my stamp, and basically we talk about this mark of the beast like some little Roman dude in a toga is out there with a magic marker writing 666 on everybody. That's not what it was. It was probably more likely a Roman signet or seal with Caesar's image on it. Okay, more like you see these burn tattoos or whatever, where they burn an image in. It's probably more something like that, or maybe even something they could wear, right? But they had this seal that said, "Okay, I have pledged my allegiance to Rome." Okay. Now, if I'm a Christian and I go in and they say, "Okay, in order to get this, you have to claim Caesar is Lord," and I say, "Wait a minute, no, God is the only God, and I will not claim my allegiance to anyone but God." Now, you've identified yourself as what? Christian. You've also identified yourself as anti-government, anti-Rome, anti-whatever. Although you may be the most peaceful, law-abiding citizen there is, and the only law you've ever broken is to say, "I'm not going to claim Caesar as higher than my Lord Jesus Christ." But as a result, now that guy gets targeted, or his family gets targeted, and you see how the domino effect could fall from that. Okay, we saw this happen in Nazi Germany, didn't we? Identify one as a Jew, go find out who he's married to, go find out who their parents were and grandparents, and all of a sudden you just start stacking them up. Okay, so understand it's again, it's a cult of emperor worship, but it's not worship. It's more political than that. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? With what? Mm-hmm.
Because obviously the government has already said for certain things, we don't even have to say what Paul just talked about. For certain things, we can shut church down,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Are you asking what we should do if that ever takes place?
right? I mean, there's a parallel. It may not
Sure.
be exactly the same thing, but it's the government persecuting Christians for wanting to gather in worship.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the question.
Well, in this case, kind of keep it in the cultural context. In this case, there weren't churches to go attack, right? Unless they found them in hiding. Okay? There were individuals to go get because of their failure to pledge their allegiance. In today's culture, yeah, if the government would come out and say, "Okay, talking about sin is now a hate crime." And all of a sudden, yeah, you can't worship anymore. I'm going to worship. And I will say this, based upon what this tells me about these churches back then, did any of this keep the church from worshiping? Now, what we also have to remember too, though, is might that type of persecution cause us to worship differently? Might cause us to worship differently, but it's not going to cease us from worshiping. Go to China right now. There's churches worshiping all over the place. Some of them are 4, some of them are 5, some of them are 10, some of them are 12, right? Because if they had a building and they worshiped in it, what was the government come do? They probably take the building, take all their property, and probably throw them in jail. All right, happened in Soviet Russia. Okay, way back when. Okay, so we see that taking place. what I know is if well, we kind of saw it here with COVID when it first hit, right? It all came out, and everybody says, what? We don't need to be together because this COVID thing's going on. What did we do? We all went home. Did the church stop meeting? No, it didn't. Did the church stop worshiping? No, it didn't. We continued on. We found ways to make it happen. And we always will. We always will. Now, if they come and shut down the internet and they shut down all that, and all of a sudden now we can't stream and we can't do that, I guarantee you, I know what would happen here. I do. You're going to find people gathering up at different houses and saying, hey, come on over, or y'all go over here, and y'all go over here, and y'all go over here, and the church is going to keep meeting, and the church is going to keep worshiping, the church is going to keep doing what it's going to be doing. And that's the message that we can take from this. Okay? Because it doesn't matter what government is in power, guess what? We win. You get to the end of this, we still win. Now, back to your other claim. Yeah, I think it's very important that we as Christians stand up and live unashamed of our God. And when a government comes in and says, you can't do this, if it violates God's principles, then I'm going to do it anyway. And if I've got to go to jail, I'm going to go to jail. And if I'm going to die, I'm going to die. But what's the message from Revelation if that's the case? You win. You still win. Right? I mean, that's the reality of but here's the amazing thing. This has been the reality forever. God's people have always found a way to be God's people and to worship God. Sure.
I think we also just fundamentally, when you're reading Revelation, you have to go back to the fact that this is being written from a man that's on an island called Patmos, most likely a prison colony.
Right.
If biblically we're not permitted to disobey the government, how did John get on Patmos?
Right.
He obviously disobeyed something.
Sure.
Castigated toward outside society.
Exactly. Well, you go from the very leader of our revolution, if you want to call it that, okay, was executed by the government. His 12 apostles, all but one, I think, died martyrs' deaths. John, the one who's writing this, is writing this from where? Prison, basically. He's on a prison island, most likely called Patmos. Okay? Throughout history, we've seen Christians after Christians after. And let me tell you something, folks. It's still happening today. It is still happening today. You go to places like Cambodia, you go to places like India, you go to a lot of different countries in Africa, China. Man, the list of martyrs for the cause of Christ keeps going up and up and up and up and up. Christians are dying because of their faith every single day on this planet. Every day. This message has never changed. It's eternal. There will always be governments who oppress God's people, but God's people will always stand, I believe, and will always be victorious. To me, that's the message of this whole book. That's why I told you from the beginning. You can forget everything else. If you remember 2 words, you get it, right? We win. That's it. And whether we die or not, we win. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. What's that? And God's the one in control. Yeah, totally. Totally. And God may come in judgment of this nation. And because we live in it, we may suffer under the judgment that God brings on it. Okay. It might, now I'm not going to say it may be unpleasant. It may be, because let's just face it. We have gotten used to a pretty cushy life. Have we not? I mean, think about it. We have a really, really, what was it? Was it Jerry Ard Sunday that was talking about the Malawian people who, $600 a year? Average income? No, that's $50 a month. You can drop that on going out to dinner around here. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just the reality of it. Paul.
Also, at that time, your religion and your social and your might have had a baker's god
Mhm.
and baker rituals, those
Sure.
kind of things. So when you're talking about these kind of marks and associations, it wouldn't be long. That's one of some of the letters to the seven churches where some of you are getting caught up in this stuff.
Right.
So it wasn't just a matter of, okay, I want to sign a form. It's now I got to go to the meeting.
Yeah.
I might have to, participate.
Support them, pay dues, well, much like our unions today. You know, and that's a good point. If you had to pledge your allegiance to the Pillsbury God or whatever, if you were a baker, Steve.
Several years ago, you probably knew of it, Brother James Judd. He went to what he raised family over Zimbabwe, and he said at one time that if you were caught in the Bible, you're subject to be killed.
Yeah, that's not uncommon in the world today. It's uncommon here. It's uncommon for us. And so what happens is we get a little bit of our rights infringed upon. And man, we're backlashing, We're like, whoa. You can't tell us what to do, right? And there's a whole lot of countries that people live in every day where they absolutely tell them everything they can do and what they can't do. I want to spend just a minute on this mark of the beast thing, and then we're going to wrap it up. I was so hoping. I really need you to keep in mind this picture of these three images, because when we get to chapter 14, we're going to see the other side of this equation. Okay, I was hoping we were going to get through it tonight, and so you could see the kind of the one side and then the other, because we've seen that before, and I really want to see it. But we'll come back and touch on this a little bit. But the mark of the beast, 666. Notice what John says before he gives it to him. What are the words he uses? This requires what? Wisdom or calculation, depending upon what translation you use. Why did he say that? Why would he say that? 666. What do we know about the number 6? Anything? It's one short of what? Perfect. One short of perfect. Now, I've heard all kinds of analysis for this mark and this number, okay? And the one that makes probably the most sense to me, since Revelation is dealing in symbolism, okay? Think about this. 6 is how far from 7? 1. See, that's a trick question. It was an easy one, though, for all you math scholars out there. Okay, now, how far is 66 from 77? How far is 666 from 777? One guy explained it this way. The harder we try to become God, going from 6 to 7, the further away we actually get. You follow it? I couldn't understand you, sweetheart. Right. Yeah. But see, you have these Caesars who so badly wanted to be God. They wanted to be 7. They wanted to be 7. And actually, at the very beginning, they were the closest they were. 6 to 7 is just 1, but the more they tried, the further actually they got away from it. Okay? Now, I don't know if that's reality or not, but it made sense to me. Okay? Because in Jewish numerology, 6 is man's number. Okay? And the attempt to become God is futile. It's like you're saying. We can't even understand God's mind. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. And yet, sometimes we think we know better. Okay? I would like you to read chapter 14, 1 through 5. That's probably all we'll get through next week because it's important. Okay? Because the very next thing John sees, after seeing the dragon, after seeing the beast out of the sea, after seeing the beast out of the earth, and all of the carnage that they're going to bring on the earth, the very next thing he sees is Jesus and the 144,000 sitting on top of Mount Zion. Now, what does that communicate? Think about that for a minute. Matter of fact, if I'd known Casey was going to lead singing, I was going to have you see it on Zion's glorious summit stood, because that is the picture that John's going to see. That's going because let me ask you, if you're one of those 7 churches, does this picture give you hope? No, it doesn't. That's why it was meant to be heard and read probably in one sitting. Because the very next picture they're going to see is the Lamb who all the way from chapter 5 has been triumphing over and over and over and over. And the redeemed, the 144,000, representative of who? The saved, the people of God, sitting on top of what? Mount Zion? Okay. You know, it's funny. How many of you... Y'all familiar with Mount Zion? Huh? Yeah. Anybody know how big it is? Huh? Yeah, it's a little more than that. 2,500 feet above sea level. Okay. Anybody know how tall Sinai was? Anybody? Well, come on. Some of you got to be geographic nerds and do all this kind of looking. No? I thought it was just kind of interesting because I got thinking about it today because, you know, we hear all these sort of, on Zion's glorious summit stood. I picture this big mountain, right? Zion's a dirt hill about 2,500 feet. It's relatively flat, okay? You probably wouldn't even know it's a hill unless you knew where you were, okay, because it's right in the middle of Jerusalem. Sinai, on the other hand, 7,500 feet, almost 5,000 feet higher than Zion. Now, put that in perspective. The tallest peak in the United States, anybody know what it is? Nope. Actually, in the continental southern 49, it's Mount Elbert in the Sierra Nevadas. It's right at 14.9, I think, or maybe it's 15.5. I don't remember. Right there. In the United States, now we could include Alaska. Denali is the tallest peak in the United States at 20,000, and then you go on to Everest, which is 27, 29, something like that. 29, yeah. But think about it. Mount Zion, 2,500 feet. Everest, 29,000. But what makes Mount Zion glorious? Who's on it? Who's on it? Not its size, not its grandeur, but who's on it. We'll talk about that next week. We're going to stop there because I don't want to get into 17 because I got a whole lot to talk about. Okay?
In the last verse there, when he talks about the number,
Yep.
he says it's the number of the beast, but it's the number of man.
Right. 6 is a man's number.
Or his number is 6. So I didn't know if he was trying to say there is a person that we all know that we're really talking about here.
And see, that's where a lot of people get into that speculation. And then those who believe in a singular antichrist, right, will want to assign this number to him, and he is this one, right? But since we're talking about 7 different churches in 7 different locations, I find it very, very unlikely that they would be talking about one specific person that they all knew, okay? But to say it is a man's, it could be talking about Caesar, maybe, but that's about as far as I think I could go with it. But the idea of 6 being the number of man, just say it's a man's number. And what he's saying is, 6, it's just like the 144,000. It's 12 times 12 elevated up, 666. It's just repeated. It's reiterated, okay? And I think all John is saying is, understand this beast is out of the earth. It is human. It is not eternal. It is not divine. It does not have the power, not even of the sea beast or the dragon, either one. So you really don't have to fear it, okay? But I don't think I could get to a point where I could say this is one guy they're talking about, if that's what you're asking.
Well, I was looking at the language change there from the number of the beast to the number of man.
Right.
Or is it actually, oh, by the way, here's the answer. His number 666.
maybe. Yeah, but that kind of like that would, if you could calculate the number to represent a single human being that they're talking about, okay, then it falls out of an apocalyptic literature and becomes literal. Figure it out, and you can go figure it out. And it becomes, and so what that would tell me is we would have to interpret all of Revelation to this point as apocalyptic. Take this one verse out, apply literal logic to it, and then go back to interpreting the rest of it apocalyptically the rest of the way. You know what I'm saying? So to think that some kind of code or some kind of mathematical reason was given to calculate a number that would identify a specific person, is that even what you're asking? And that's where a lot of the crazy theories come from, because I mean you can manipulate numbers to make them do whatever you want them to do, and some have. And they've, some people have taken Caesar Augustus and they've actually assigned numerical value to each letter in his name, and you add that up and do this, and it comes out to 666. And I heard you can actually do the exact same. You could do the exact same computation with Mickey Mouse. I'm not positive about that, but it wouldn't surprise me if Mickey really was the Antichrist. Yes, Michelle, I said that, wherever she is. But no, I'm just saying there's a whole lot of people out there that want to make more into this. But the problem with that is, I don't want to jump all into this. The problem with that is if I start looking at Revelation from either a postmillennial or a premillennial viewpoint that says, okay, there's going to be this, and then after this is going to be this, and I've already decided that all this is going to happen, and then I go and I read Revelation. Now I have to interpret Revelation based upon an hermeneutic that I've already established before I've even read it, which is backwards. You don't decide how to interpret Scripture and then go to Scripture. You go to Scripture, and then you allow it to flow through you. Boyd. And then we got to wrap it up. Not even there. There's so many terms that get associated with Revelation that aren't in Revelation. Okay? Right. Yeah, exactly. But they all get associated. They all get kind of pulled together because, you know why? It makes a really good movie. And we all know that if it was on the big screen, it must be true. Right? How many of you have ever watched Da Vinci Code? I thought it was a really good movie. But there's a whole lot of people running around thinking that's like a scriptural text. Like all these secrets are buried underneath the Vatican, and we got to go dig them up and find them because, we got to get Nick Cage to go after he's finished stealing the Constitution to go over there and steal that. And we think it's all real. But that's the world we live in. Anyway. Okay, I know we've gone way too long tonight, but hey, thanks for your questions. Love it. Tonight, Casey's got a song for us. One more song. If you need anything tonight, if you need prayers, if you need anything in your walk with Christ, we're here to help as best we can. Just let us know as we stand, as we sing.